Welcome, everyone. My name's Erin Menne. I am a grants program manager at Minnesota Housing. I oversee the Minnesota Housing Trust Fund Rental Assistance Program and work on a team that administers the Homework Starts with Home program, and I will be your moderator for this panel. I'm pleased to welcome leaders situated in Minnesota who are working to end homelessness. We have John Patterson, Rinal Ray, Roberto Reyes, who will reflect and respond to the findings shared at our morning's keynote speaker by Dr. Marybeth Shinn, who will also be joining us in this conversation. So welcome panelists, welcome audience members, and audience members, please feel free to utilize the chat feature to share your reactions from the keynote, to questions, and time permitting, we may have a little bit of a chance to open up for questions towards the end. So I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves and get your initial reaction from Dr. Beth Shinn's keynote. And I'll start with you, John. If you could introduce yourself and just give an initial reaction from what you heard this morning. What struck you?
Thanks, Erin. I'm John Patterson. I'm the Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at Minnesota Housing. And I guess my reaction to the presentation was great. And the thing that really jumped out to me as being the most surprising was that, infants as a population are the most likely to use shelter. And actually, I'm working on a project now with the Minnesota Department of Health's Health Equity Center, where we're looking at the connection between housing instability and infant and maternal health, and trying to make that connection and see if you can actually have no child born into homelessness, and to see if that can actually turn the curve on infant and maternal health disparities, particularly in the African American and American Indian communities. I think that what was really reassuring about the presentation was that this is not rocket science. We just need more rent assistance. I think sometimes we have a habit of overthinking this, and if we can really devote our resources to that, that's reassuring. I think some of the follow-up questions came up with this. I know the person asked a question about housing choice vouchers and lack of funding. I think the remaining question is, when we have a lack of funding, how do we use those limited resources as effectively as possible? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have. So that's my overview of my initial thoughts.
Thank you, John. Rinal, we'll jump to you. Introduce yourself and give some initial reactions.
Sure thing. Good morning, everyone. My name is Revan Ray. I am the Interim Executive Director at People Serving People, and I use she, her pronouns. I feel like there's a few different roles that I'm coming in with, in addition to the role at People Serving People. I also am a co-chair of the Voices and Choices Coalition for Children that really specifically focuses on kids of color and Indigenous children 0 to 8 in Minnesota, and working at thinking about how communities most directly impacted by issues are really the keys to the solution of those issues. That's something we're working on here at People Serving People as the region's largest shelter for families and children experiencing homelessness. So I really appreciated this morning's talk and presentation. One of the things that was striking to me is the impact of housing choice vouchers in reducing homelessness. Like, that data is quite compelling. And as John said, we know the things that are working, and that is reassuring. And we need political will to actually make those things happen, and a commitment of resources to make those things happen. And I feel like that's a thing that we can work on together as a community. Like, we can shift political will because we all have power in some different ways. I found myself thinking about around like the intersectional impacts of capitalism, and I saw that was coming into the chat as wages stagnate, but rents increase. What is the role of capitalism in all of that? And how do we actually truly make housing affordable? And kind of the patriarchy in a way. 80% of the folks here with us in shelter identify as women, and they are primary caregivers for their families. So what is the role of gender identification and the patriarchy as a contributing factor to family homelessness?
Thank you, Rinal. Roberto, please introduce yourself and share your reactions.
Good morning. My name's Roberto Reyes, and I'm the state coordinator for the McKinney-Vento Act at the schools at MDE, Minnesota Department of Education. I've been there now almost, 9 years. I have collaborated a lot with DHS and sat on different panels as far as like rapid rehousing funds, and also I've sat worked with Minnesota Housing. I remember when we were going to the legislature to ask for the rental subsidy and that whirlwind, and we also collaborated with the University of Minnesota about talking about doing the research for our population in the schools, and also kids and families that are kind of like they're kind of stuck with this DHS web of child protection, child welfare in the system, and families that are going in and out of the shelters, and families that are homeless. Also, we also collaborate on those counts that we do for HUD and everything. But I was kind of what got me was that telephone survey. Like, we don't go for telephone survey, but I was kind of impressed by that telephone survey that was done previously back in I guess it was back in the 90s. It was a good time. And now we rely on the PIT count, or we rely on other ways to count our homeless population. And especially in January or February in Minnesota with our beautiful weather, when it's minus 12 below, it's kind of hard to find people outside. It's just not. So that reality of what HUD mandates and what our reality is doesn't really align. And that's kind of a lot with my agency. We have a lot of laws and statutes for schools and for kids and credit that may not even apply to our homeless kids in our schools, because it was designed for 2-parent households, stable income, stable neighborhoods, and our families are constantly, and children are constantly moving, and mobility is very high. And we also have a lot of we have school liaisons that help us track and families and children in our schools, but we also have a lot of turnover of that staff. So that's another challenge. And I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Roberto. And Dr. Beth, Shinn, I invite you to react to any reactions from our panelists, or just interject wherever you feel appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all great comments. For John, and thinking about, how do we prioritize when we just don't have the resources that we want? I think there's several things we could try. One is that I would definitely prioritize the poorest folks. Every study shows that it makes the most difference there. If you don't have enough, and it's a lottery that some people are getting a housing choice voucher, was great, and other people are getting nothing. Let's at least give it to the poorest folks. Second thing we could try, and this may not make me terribly popular in either affordable housing circles or in education circles, is to say, if we can't get more resources, should we dole them out a little bit differently? So given that it's the youngest kids who are using shelters, and given that homelessness actually drops, literal homelessness, at the point that kids get to school age and childcare expenses drop, should we think about 5-year housing choice vouchers that bring a family to the youngest child up to school age? Now, that's not going to help school children, but it might help families get stable, develop sources of income early on. Should we think about something that's less valuable than a housing choice voucher? I mean, most poor people are spending over 50% of their income on rent at this point. Should we give something that is a little less valuable than a housing choice voucher? And if I were doing that, I would probably make it a fixed amount rather than a proportion of income, because the housing choice voucher essentially poses a marginal tax on someone's income because it holds your rent to 30% of your income. Every additional dollar you earn has a 30% marginal tax in addition to your Social Security FICA tax and any other taxes that you pay. If we were taxing rich people that way, it would be confiscatory, 30% marginal tax, but we do it for poor people. And since other programs also fall off with your income, it makes a real disincentive for people to do better. So I might make it, I think we should experiment with fixed income amounts and possibly something like a 5-year subsidy. We know that 8 months is too little. Would 5 years be enough? And if people knew. For Rinal's, did I say that right? Absolutely intersectionality, patriarchal capitalism. Boy, those are so much bigger kinds of issues, and they permeate everything as racism permeates everything and other forms of social exclusion. I find it hard enough to manage trying to generate will for housing that I'm happy to kind of rein in capitalism as opposed to trying to overthrow the system. But I think you're absolutely right, that these are issues that underlie the kinds of problems we have. I just don't know how to get purchase on them. And for Roberto, the counts issues are really interesting. We know we miss people in the middle of the night in January. We actually did a study of it in New York City. We put out fake homeless people to see whether the counters captured them. And we figured that New York City, which has about the best count in the country, missed about 50% of the people who were on the streets, or because they were in places where they couldn't be counted, or because the counters never showed up. The telephone survey, it'd be harder to do today because people know not to answer their phones, and survey researchers are having a lot of trouble. But back in 1990, that was a pretty good way of getting hold of people. And the scope of the problem is just so much larger than we're willing to acknowledge, that we just really need to do things to shore up the safety net, to shore up incomes at the bottom, to reduce housing costs, all of the above. So let me stop there.
I think Rinal might be having bandwidth issues, so I'll try to connect with her.
Great, thank you. I see her on the screen now, so maybe stable.
I'm sorry, were the problems with me?
I don't believe so. I think you came through clear.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. The model that was discussed this morning was developed to target homelessness prevention services. What are some strategies that you find helpful in preventing homelessness within the context in which you work? And what more could be done? John, I'll pass that to you next.
Thanks. I actually want to continue the same discussion about targeting that Beth and I are having. I guess the issue I have is I love the family option study. It's been fantastic for us at Minnesota Housing. We use it with our legislature to sort of show our state-funded rent assistance program, which is basically mirrors it, and that Erin runs, is highly effective. And it's been great to show the legislature its evidence-based, proven approach. But I guess my question is, again, with the lack of funding, and we have resources for rapid rehousing. The family option study shows that that's far less effective. But the question really is of targeting. Maybe there's a certain population that could work well. Maybe it's someone who just needs a couple months just to overcome a specific short period crisis, but doesn't need ongoing assistance. And one of the approaches we've taken with the Homework Starts with Home is progressive engagement, of sort of looking at people, give them some initial housing assistance. If they need permanent ongoing, they get that. But sort of adjust the level of intervention to the person's needs as it progresses over time, guarantee that they'll have assistance. I'm just kind of curious, that I see progressive engagement working. You need providers who are able to do that type of targeting and funding sources that are flexible enough to adjust over time between different types of assistance. And so I think that's what we are trying with Homework Starts with Home. It's a challenge because of the complexity of doing progressive engagement and with the funding sources that aren't flexible enough really to make it work.
Mm-hmm. So let me respond directly to that and then let other people chime in with whatever they have to say. The families and family options hated it. And they said, and I can't quickly pull up a quotation, I feel like I'm being set up for failure. If I don't do well enough, they'll cut me off. If I do too well, they'll cut me off. They want me to be, stuck in this sort of middle place, so I can keep getting assistance. And so doing it, you said guarantee there, and that's a really important word. I mean, and certainty, so that families kind of know what they're up against. If you gave people a year up front and they knew it was going to be a year rather than doling it out in 3-month increments, that might make families happier. 8 months was too little. You can do rapid rehousing now for up to 2 years, I believe. And so having longer term assistance is probably going to be important for a lot of people. Going for we're talking about scarcity, but going just for the people who have a short-term crisis that rapid rehousing will help them over leads to cherry picking. It means that you get your money to the people who are not the worst off. So it is a dilemma. It is a dilemma when you don't have the resources.
And I will clarify, the program doesn't guarantee it, but something I think we need the guarantee to make it work. It's the flexible funding sources and the ability to go long term. But I agree, it's a challenge with limited resources of how do we make this work if we don't have equivalent of a housing choice voucher that's permanent.
I don't know if other people wanted to respond to that, Prom.
Yeah, I'll pass the mic to Rinal if you have some thoughts on targeting and your work.
Yeah, sure. I apologize because it seems like I'm coming in and out, so I'm sorry if that keeps happening. I'm not sure what's going on. So people serving people, one of the things that we're trying, and I don't know if this will work, right? So we've got to try some things to figure out what works, is to really think about how we lead and proceed in a way around our prevention efforts in an effort to move upstream to help prevent the experience of family homelessness that really puts family voices at the center and that leads with an explicit racial equity lens and a racial justice lens. And so there's a few projects that we have going on right now that try to do that around both a programmatic and a systems issue. So one is a local Hennepin County issue where we recognize the need to shift a policy and to also build some financial power with families. And we wanted to try to do that in a way that really models for us as an organization and for our systems that actually families have really great and creative ideas. They're the folks who are closest to the problems that are leading to their experience, and they're also closest to the solutions. So we have this, we're working with folks at Hennepin County's Eligibility Work Services and with researchers through Cura and Research in Action to do this pilot project, to do this work around shifting systems and building a financial empowerment program that addresses roots of financial trauma, that builds in some peer support, that hopefully builds a safety net so that once families leave shelter, they can experience housing stability in a way that works for them and also build a little bit of like a cushion for them as well. So we think, like, our theory is that there could be some ways to do this work that prevent the reoccurrence of family homelessness. I think that's where we are best positioned to do our work, building on the relationships we develop with families. We are also approaching some prevention services and prevention work with an explicit 2-generation or whole family approach as well. So thinking about kind of the whole family unit. And a lot of our work historically in this area has been around access to early education and providing high quality early education, both on site at the shelter and in the community through our Center of Excellence. And we've had the privilege and the opportunity to work and learn from Ann Maston for a number of years on ways that we can increase resilience with our kids and kind of think about approaching our work in a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive way. And then finally, the last thing we're trying right now is we've received some resources that we can deploy really flexibly. So we're working with families who have been with us and who are now in community at a point where we recognize they kind of get to a tipping point where things are maybe falling apart from a financial resource perspective that may tip them back into reentering the shelter system. So with some of these dollars that we've received, we're able to help families with maybe back rent or car fix or childcare copay, really being responsive to what families need and when they need them. And that's something we're trying out as well. And we're also, as we're doing this, we're also working on narrative expansion as a prevention strategy writ large, kind of expanding on this dominant public narrative that Dr. Shinn, you spoke to in your presentation around, well, who is worthy of services and supports and who is not? Whose fault is homelessness and whose fault is it not? And we know that the story is much bigger and broader than it's this family's fault or this person's fault that they are experiencing homelessness. And how can we bring the community along as we do that through our programs as well? So those are all things that we're trying. We don't know exactly what will work, and that's kind of the joy and the challenge of where we are as an organization right now.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear about all of those things. And I'm certainly a fan of two-generation programs. I think that's a real evidence-based practice for family and child well-being, whether it's helps with homelessness or not. I haven't seen the evidence there, but homelessness is not the only outcome. And Ann Maston's work on building resilience for kids who are facing homelessness makes a lot of sense. One sort of radical corollary of your idea, which I agree with, that families know best, would be forget the social services and just give them the money. Have a guaranteed kind of income for families, or a guaranteed stipend for families with young children, or some such. And it would be interesting to see how that works. And I totally agree. I guess it was John who said earlier that we should try to keep young children out of shelters. And I'm talking with people in both New York and California. Neither of these projects is off the ground or guaranteed or anything, about a prevention program targeted to women who are pregnant, who are at high risk of homelessness, to see if we can prevent homelessness in that group to begin with. But I don't know if Roberto had something to say here.
Before he jumps in, I want to touch on this a bit, because it's a question that I've had as we've been hearing your presentation. So Rinal's talking a lot about services and cash assistance along with that. And what I'm hearing you say, Beth, is that it's a really light touch, maybe accessing some mainstream assistance and having some cash assistance available for those ad hoc crises that come with the car repair or something. So can you speak a little bit more about that, of the role of services in sustaining prevention households? Either Rinal or Beth, talk about the role and the benefit of services, or should we really be shifting to really subsidies and not and steer maybe back away from a progressive engagement idea? Curious.
I'm a researcher. It's an empirical question. It's the sort of thing that I would love to study. What happens when the home-based program is mostly services with a little bit of financial assistance available for the kinds of things that you've talked about. So it's similar to, I think, what you're talking about, less intensive, it sounds like, than what you're talking about. And it works modestly. What would, just giving the families that money do instead? And how would you select them?
And I am a practitioner, so I don't know exactly what the like with how we would conduct or bear out this research. What I do know anecdotally from our team and from our families is that in the last several years we've been working with families who have higher barriers to stable housing. And so there is still a need for services, in particular services that are culturally relevant around mental and chemical health, around kind of helping families overcome some of the social exclusion factors that Dr. Shinn spoke to earlier, right? Like how do we help our families navigate racist systems that are not set up for their success? So whether that's a traditional service or a different kind of approach, there is still some need for them. And one of the things that we recognize is that our families know what's best for them. They have a vision for what their lives are, and our role as folks who work at People Serving People is to come around and support that vision. And we really allow our families empower our families to kind of determine how they want to engage the services that we have on site. We try really hard not to make a family take advantage of some of the services we offer.
There's some really interesting things coming up in the chat, and so I hope we can get people to talk a little bit more.
Thank you. Yeah, and a reminder to folks to please use the chat feature. I want to shift to Roberto, and I'll do my best to read while listening to. Roberto, can you share your perspective on targeting prevention, homelessness prevention, and the work that you do?
Well, we collaborate with the CLCs and we at the schools, and we work with our continuum of care throughout the state. So we're broken. The CLCs are broken down in different regions. So personally, I spent some time in the northwest part of the state because there's a grant from HUD to help this part of the state identify homeless youth. Specifically youth that are disconnected youth, which they're called, and this is a grant money that DEED gets. So we collaborated with the local team people up there, even like reservations, Indian reservations. We've worked with higher education, with the school districts, with the counties to help identify these youth that are not in school, that are not in the workforce, and that they're homeless and they're kind of hovering around the northwest part of the state. So that's an interesting project where people can come together. And I actually drove up there with Eric Grumdahl, and it was a gloomy day. We made it up there for the meeting. So that project is pretty promising. And we also work with the schools. We try to work with the schools and the homeless liaisons to connect with their local continuum of care so that they can collaborate on housing supports and subsidies or HUD or state funding. But there are gaps. We still have a lot of gaps. And I think that we also need to turn to educating people on how to be a good renter, find out why are these evictions happening with these families, and we need to give them the education and the coaching so that they can keep an apartment or a home, and also help them with the subsidy. And like we have elementary schools that we can walk in and you can see 80% of the kids have been evicted, 80% eviction in that school alone. And I'm looking at these children and they're 6 and 7, this elementary, and these kids are getting evicted over and over and over. And then I turn around and I ask, where do they live? Oh, they live in these apartment buildings around here in this block radius, right across from the school. And then we look at, so does the company, they get a subsidy from the state, and they get a subsidy, and they're still doing these practices. And then I talk to a lawyer in the community that's supposed to be mediating, but once the eviction goes through, it's a big barrier for the families to get on their feet. So we're kind of looking at a lot of different things, but we really need to we're going to concentrate on little pods. Let's say we're going to do elementary school kids. We need to stabilize these kids, because the teachers are telling me, listen, we are offering therapy because these kids are being traumatized because they're getting evicted over and over. So it's kind of like, it's a challenge, but it's something that we're seeing and we're hearing every day in our schools. And then a lot of our families will not be eligible for these subsidies, of course. And we also need also flippers, like when we had the welfare to work, where people all of a sudden say, oh, guess what? You could work now and you could still get county help. We had flippers that would say, oh, you need a battery to get to work? Yeah, we can get you a battery. Oh, you need tires? Yeah, you need tires. So we need people where they can get some support so they can keep going and continue to work, continue to stay in housing. And also there's a lot of mental illness out there. We need to work closer to the counties to provide some mental health supports for families, because a lot of these things may dwell not only on poverty but also on a mental health state of the entire family composition. So we need to collaborate more and talk more. Basically, it may not be just funding, but more collaboration. Yeah.
Thanks, Roberto. I see in the chat too that a lot of advocacy for services, speaking to your supporting renters and progressive engagement. So we're not doing away with services. I don't think that's the message, but finding out what works well and really hearing, there's a shout out to how Rinal was talking about it, really speaking to what the family's needs are. So knowing your families and working with people where they're at. I want to shift gears to, we're getting low on time already, so I want to shift gears to our final question. Dr. Beth Shinn calls out the history and systems of social exclusion as a root cause of homelessness. So in addressing homelessness inequities, what needs to be dismantled from our current systems to function well for families? Again, we'll start with you, John.
Sure. I think the thing to me that really makes this come alive is, in Minnesota, a American Indian is 3.8 times more likely to be in poverty, but they're 21 times more likely to be homeless. An African American person is 3.9 times more likely to be in poverty, but 14 times more likely to be homeless. So it's not just an income question. There's clearly embedded racism there. And I think really what needs to be dismantled is there's a lot of stuff in the system. We need to revamp tenant screening criteria. We need to have, as the main presentation talked about, we need to have prohibit source of income discrimination. So I think there's a lot of things in there that just are just racist constructs in our system that we need to get rid of. And I think too, just culturally appropriate services, we need to add that. Housing navigation services that are culturally appropriate, permanent supportive housing that's culturally appropriate. I think there's a lot of little things we can do to break down that barrier.
Thanks, John. Rinal, do you have some thoughts?
Everything that John said. And I'll just also share that, I really appreciate the way this whole conference started, with acknowledgments and rooting in a historical perspective on how we got here, and who is more likely to be experiencing homelessness. It's something we've been working on at People Serving People in our recognition. And I think when we can acknowledge that history and acknowledge its impact and how it lives on today, like that's the start of how we start dismantling some of the ways that in policies and practices, and the ways in which those practices and policies are manifested through the ways that workers work with families and then individuals experience, because it's all connected, and it all needs to be dismantled in some ways. I think that we have an opportunity to create something really different that really works for families by centering them, and to be leading and envisioning a future that is rooted in something that is really different. That is, comes from a place of, actually, we do have enough as a society and certainly as a state to make sure that everybody is taken care of in the ways that we know we want to make sure all people have dignity in their lives and in their homes and the way that they work, and to kind of move forward and live towards that. It may sound Pollyanna, it may sound a little bit naive, but I really do think we need to start envisioning a future that's rooted in a deep and powerful love for one another and for our community as a whole.
It's got to be the goal.
Yeah, thank you for that. Roberto, what needs to be dismantled from our current system to function to address the homelessness inequities? Your thoughts on that?
We need, I think, well, I know we need to get representation at the table from the people that are living the homelessness. So we actually need people that are out on the streets. They need to be part of our conversations and our solutions. And they don't necessarily have to be invited to a meeting, to a conference room with air conditioning, heat, and all that. We could do it remotely. You could do a video. We need their perspective, and people that are using some of these programs, and such as like what People Serving People is doing. And we need to see, what works, what's working, what is not working for you, and it's a day-to-day thing. So we need to get representations from the Native American tribes in these committees. We have 11 tribes in our state. We also need African American presence. We need actual African American families and persons to be part of these committees. And I don't know how do you do it, but we it's a challenge, but we have to come out of our comfort zone as Minnesotans, so to speak. And that's the only, we need to hear from the consumers. Just like Target does and Walmart, they hear from their consumers. We need to hear from the consumers, which are the people that are most at risk, that are living homelessness. And we will not be able to change this until we come out of our comfort zone and invite them. Even if you're living in a tent and you know that you're down the street from where we're having this meeting to discuss homelessness, we got to find a way to link you into the meeting. So that's what we need to do. And I challenge people, I challenge everyone to do this, because this is the only way we're going to be able to do it. And I know in the schools we're working very hard, and we're collaborating at the state level and at the local level, but we can't do it alone for sure.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm seeing a lot of kudos for your advocacy to engage clients and people with lived experience in making system changes, as well as your emphasis on collaboration. And I might just add to that, I feel like my little public servant heart is really delighted in working and being engaged in government right now. I feel like in this time, I'm sitting 4 blocks south of the George Floyd Memorial Site, and seeing that we as state government have moved conversations about disparities from the meeting rooms where we have the data to let's do this. So I'm really energized by that. I'm energized by our work with COVID funds, and that we can do things quicker and differently than we have before. So I really invite people to push on state government to really make some changes. Thank you, panelists. I want to thank the audience for their great questions, and give Beth a minute to have any closing remarks.
I'm sorry we didn't get to hear more from the folks in the audience, but I appreciate all the chat here. I think you're all absolutely right. And we need to hear from people who are experiencing this, and not just guess at what might be good for them, but make it an us. And the levels of historical trauma that our Indigenous folks have experienced, I talk more about African Americans because we've got more research there, but the disparities are even worse for Native Americans than they are for African Americans in homelessness. So we really need to think about all of those issues in trying to work with people to craft.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, John, Rinal, Roberto, and Dr. Marybeth Shinn for bringing your research to life and in conversation with us. Reminder to the attendees that we'll be taking a 15-minute break. So from 10:30 to 10:45 Central Standard Time. Do what you need to do, come on back. You should be able to navigate from the main screen to the next session, which is kind of our main event, our research reveal for the Homework Starts with Home Research Evaluation Progress. It's a presentation by the Homework Starts with Home Research Partnership that is really looking to inform solutions on student homelessness through integrated data and collaborative research. So thank you so much for your participation, and we will see you in 15.